You kept that mule Corferon. Russ kept his kin-friends. The lion kept Luther. Humans, brothers and foster fathers, saved and raised into legion ranks. But not me. Not Angron, no. Did the Emperor teleport his gold-wrapped custodians down to help me and my army? No. Did he free the warhounds and order them to battle, fight alongside me? No. Did he save my brothers and sisters the way he spared and honoured the lion's closest kin, the way he honoured Corferon? No, no, and no. No mercy for Angron. Angron the Oathbreaker, Angron the Betrayer. Primarch. Angron explaining his anger towards the Emperor to his brother Lorgar. Primarch of the Word-Bearers, the Emperor of mankind is often revered as a godlike figure and the ultimate architect of humanity's survival. However, a closer examination of his actions reveals a chilling pattern of disregard for the lives of those he created to safeguard humanity, specifically the Space Marines. The tragic fates of the Thunder Warriors, the betrayal of numerous legions, and the harrowing tale of the World Eaters, particularly their Primarch Angron, serve as poignant reminders of the Emperor's moral failures and the consequences of his flawed vision. The Thunder Warriors were the Emperor's first attempts at creating superhuman soldiers. Designed for the unification of terror, they exhibited immense strength and resilience, yet their genetic engineering was fundamentally flawed. As these warriors began to exhibit signs of instability and erratic behavior rather than acknowledge the consequences of his imperfect designs, the Emperor ordered their execution. The Thunder Warriors, once seen as instruments of his will, were systematically purged, a cold and calculating response to the failure of his own creation. This act not only highlights the Emperor's willingness to dispose of those who no longer served his purposes, but also underscores a troubling lack of empathy for the lives of the beings he had created. The Emperor's handling of the Space Marines did not improve with the creation of the legions. Each of the 20 Primarchs was a testament to his ambition. However, the Emperor's lack of foresight and his authoritarian nature fostered an environment ripe for dissent. As the Great Crusade progressed, the Emperor increasingly isolated himself from his sons, failing to nurture the bonds that could have solidified their loyalty. The emotional and psychological void left by this neglect contributed to the eventual betrayals that fractured the Imperium. Emperor's heavy-handed approach led many to question his motives and ultimately sowed the seeds of rebellion. The Emperor's withdrawal from his sons and his disregard for their emotional well-being created fertile ground for manipulation by external forces, notably chaos, leading to their eventual betrayal. Among the most tragic stories of the Space Marine legions is that of the World Eaters, led by their Primarch, Angron. Angron's life is a narrative steeped in brutality and neglect, echoing the larger theme of the Emperor's disregard for his creations. When Angron was forcibly removed from Luteria, the Emperor's interference stripped him of his agency, forcing him into the role of a leader while disregarding the emotional and psychological scars of his past. The butcher's nails implants which Angron received further distorted his mind, amplifying his rage and bloodlust. Yet the Emperor seemed unconcerned about the psychological implications of such alterations. Instead of offering guidance or support, the Emperor left Angron to navigate the complexities of leadership in a state of constant inner turmoil. The World Eaters, consumed by their own rage and driven by Angron's brutal legacy, became instruments of chaos and destruction. The Emperor's failure to properly understand or nurture Angron and his brothers led to their eventual fall from grace. Angron's transformation into a demon prince exemplifies the tragic consequences of the Emperor's neglect, turning what should have been noble protectors of humanity into brutal marauders driven by unquenchable thirst for bloodshed. Angron, often referred to as the Red Angel, and originally known as Angronius of Nuceria, the Lord of the Red Sands, stands as the Primarch of the World Eaters' Traitor Legion. He is renowned as the most brutal and savage of all the Primarchs. When Horus initiated his rebellion against the Emperor, Angron swiftly aligned himself with this treachery, fueled by a long-standing vendetta against the master of mankind. This animosity stemmed from the Emperor's failure to rescue his cherished fellow gladiators from their grim fates on Nuceria. However, it was ultimately the seething rage and insatiable bloodlust within him that governed his actions. During the Horus heresy, Angron succumbed to chaos and was subsequently transformed into a demon prince of Khorne, the blood god, amidst the campaign known as the Shadow Crusade, long before the conflict reached its conclusion. Most recently, in the year 474 of the 41st millennium, he was banished to the Warp after unleashing the First War of Armageddon upon the Imperium of Man. However, since the emergence of the Great Rift during the era Indomitus, whispers have circulated that he has returned to activity within real space once more. In the shadowy depths of the library, Sanctus on Terra lies a tome known as the Liber Malum, its blood-stained pages chronicling the fates of those who have ventured down the path to damnation. Merely uttering its name invites the spectre of madness. Within its pages are inscribed the names of many blasphemous heretics and tyrants whose treacheries have sullied its contents. But at the forefront of these damned souls is Angron, the Primarch of the treacherous World Eaters Space Marine Legion. Much of Angron's legend remains fragmentary, with numerous aspects obscured by dark myth, rendering the true details nearly impossible to ascertain. The broader Imperial record contains scant information regarding the life of demon Primarch Angron. During the scattering of the Primarch's gestation capsules from the Emperor of Mankind's gene laboratories, hidden beneath the Himalayan mountains, Angron was cast through the Warp to a civilized human world far removed from Terra. The circumstances that led to Angron's separation from the Emperor shortly after his creation, as well as the identity of the planet he eventually called home, have been expunged from the Imperial archives. Indeed, the exact location of this world, if it still exists, remains uncertain to the Imperial scholars of today. There is credible evidence to suggest that this information, including the true name of the world where he was found, was known but intentionally obscured by the Emperor and his close advisors. The reality is a grim narrative detailing the Primarch's harsh upbringing, his propensity for violence, and Angron's rebellion against his merciless masters. After being severed from the Emperor and Terra by the enigmatic machinations of the ruinous powers, Angron was deposited through the Warp onto the world of Nuceria. The precise location of this planet in the galaxy, or even its current existence, is unclear, though indications suggest it lies within the Ultima Segmentum. According to Carpinus' Speculum Historiale, Angron's home was a technologically advanced society, ruled by a wealthy elite living in decadent luxury, while the masses languished in dire poverty in the slums encircling their fortified palaces and villas. To divert the populace's attention from their squalor, the oligarchic rulers of Nuceria orchestrated regular gladiatorial death matches in grand arenas featuring cybernetically enhanced gladiators who fought to satiate the insatiable bloodlust of the oppressed. It was within this brutal world that Primarch Angron was ultimately discovered, although little else is known about the circumstances surrounding his arrival there. Captured and enslaved by the planet's ruling elite, known as the High Riders, the young boy was taken to the Palace Praxica, the seat of power for the Rexium throne in the influential Nucerian city-state of Deshea, where he was sold to the dominant clan, House Thalka. As a frightened child, he was callously cast into a pit containing a single ziggurat, along with hundreds of other slaves. This pit, filled with corrosive acid, forced Angron to fight for survival, leading him to kill those around him in a desperate bid to remain atop the ziggurat's highest platform. Shedding a final tear, Angron emerged as a promising contender in the arena of Deshea. Recognizing his evident potential as a gladiator, he was purchased by the largest and most renowned arena in the capital. There, he was given the name Angron Thalkir, meaning Child of the Mountain, and was nursed back to health. Rapidly growing into a formidable figure, Angron was compelled to participate in the savage gladiatorial games of Nuceria. Within a mere few solar months, Angron Thalkir had evolved into a proud warrior of exceptional skill and an unwavering sense of honor, earning the moniker the Lord of the Red Sands. He vanquished hundreds of adversaries, but always spared those who displayed remarkable prowess in combat. With his string of victories, Angron quickly became a beloved figure in Deshea, celebrated as the Unbeaten. Despite his apparent enjoyment of the gladiatorial life and the adoration of the crowds, he secretly harbored resentment towards his enslavement, and was constantly devising plans to escape. He became a problematic champion, frequently attempting to flee whenever an opportunity arose, though these efforts were consistently thwarted. During this tumultuous period, Angron was mentored by an older gladiator named Enemius, who formed a profound bond with the young warrior, becoming a fatherly figure to him. Together, they forged a fearsome reputation in the arenas of Nuceria, culminating in a remarkable victory against two berserk Ogryn, enhanced with the deadly cybernetic implants known as the Butcher's Nails. Yet their triumphant moment was fleeting as the High Riders demanded that the two gladiators face each other in a duel to the death. The fiery Angron defiantly refused, openly insulting his Nucerian overlords. In response, Angron was punished with the implantation of the Butcher's Nails, devices crudely hammered into his skull and surgically affixed to his cerebral cortex. These relics from the dark age of technology artificially heightened a warrior's adrenaline, amplifying their strength and aggression in combat. However, they stripped away all reason, caution, and the instincts of self-preservation. The nails rewarded fury with surges of electrochemical ecstasy, dulling all enjoyment of life. Never had a more effective instrument of slaughter been devised by human hands. The cells beneath the grand arena housed thousands of gladiators, all implanted with the Butcher's Nails, and soon Angron would join their ranks. Following the surgical procedure, he was unleashed upon Enemius, succumbing to a blind, frenzied rage as he brutally tore his mentor apart. Upon regaining his senses, Angron was horrified by the terrible act he had committed against his friend. Overwhelmed by despair, he was said to have emitted a primal howl that echoed for several solar days. The loss of Enemius became an unbearable burden for Angron, who vowed that one day he would secure his freedom and exact vengeance on the High Riders for their cruel treatment. In just a few short years, Angron's reputation grew to encompass every corner of his homeworld. Under his guidance, the gladiators within his arena evolved into the finest fighters the planet had ever known, vanquishing all challengers. However, following a final unsuccessful escape attempt, Angron realized he could never achieve freedom alone. His unwavering code of honor and formidable combat prowess earned him the respect of his fellow Deshaean gladiators. When the grandest death games in Nucerian history were announced, Angron devised his boldest plan yet. For these games, Angron was permitted to orchestrate a massive battle that would involve every gladiator in his arena. As the Deshaean crowd roared, drowning out the clash of combat, Angron's warriors turned against their armed captors, ruthlessly slaughtering them as they fought for their freedom. Although they suffered grievous losses against the armed guards, nearly 2,000 gladiators managed to escape into the streets of Deshaea, seizing whatever weapons and supplies they could before fleeing to the northern mountains where Angron had first been discovered. In the years that followed, the ruling class dispatched numerous armed forces to eliminate or recapture the rebel slaves who had taken to calling themselves the Eaters of Cities. However, Angron's leadership, martial skill, and the enhanced fury of the gladiators proved more than sufficient to dispatch each wave of attackers. Yet, attrition and hunger began to take their toll, and eventually only 1,000 men and women remained, half the number of those who had initially escaped. On the mountain of Fedan Muor, situated on the desolate Deshalika Ridge, Angron and his forces found themselves encircled by no less than 7 substantial Nucerian armies. Even a Primarch could hardly withstand such overwhelming numbers, but it was at this critical moment that the Emperor of Mankind descended upon Nuceria, drawn by the psychic resonance of his gene son. Having observed Angron discreetly from orbit for several solar months, the Emperor felt pride as he witnessed his son lead his freed slaves in battle against oppressive forces. The Emperor, accompanied by a select group of Legio Custodes, descended to the planet's surface. Once the initial shock of their meeting subsided, the Emperor offered Angron command of the 12th Space Marine Legion, the Warhounds, formed from his own genetic legacy, and a role at his side in the Great Crusade. To the Emperor's astonishment, Angron declined, asserting that his loyalty lay with his fellow slaves among the Eaters of Cities, and he would rather die than abandon them. With a heavy heart, the Emperor returned to his flagship, shocked by his son's refusal. Assessing the situation, the Emperor realized that despite Angron's prowess as a Primarch and a leader, he was doomed in the imminent battle. Losing such an invaluable son to a horde of rabble on a remote planet soon to be brought into Imperial compliance was simply intolerable. Positioning his flagship in low orbit, the Emperor teleported Angron from the surface against his will, away from Fedan Emhor and the impending battle of Deshalika Ridge. Without their leader, the gladiators' morale shattered, leading to their complete annihilation the following day at the hands of Nuceria's armies. Angron could only watch in horror from orbit as his brothers and sisters were swiftly exterminated. Sensing his uncontrollable fury, the custodians formed a protective circle around Angron. Their guardian spears aimed menacingly at the seething Primarch. In a sudden fit of rage, Angron struck down one of the custodians, but the Emperor intervened, subduing Angron with his formidable psychic powers. Angron, filled with anger, demanded to know why the Emperor had not acted to save his comrades below. The Emperor dismissed the question, stating it lacked foresight. As the Emperor of mankind, he had a far grander vision for humanity, one focused on reuniting the galaxy for the sake of all mankind. He had little regard for a small group of former slaves battling petty tyrants on a backwater world. The Emperor expressed his hope that, in time, Angron would come to understand his decisions and actions. Angron replied that he was meant to die alongside his comrades on Nuceria, leaving only a ghost behind. The Emperor responded that a ghost would suffice for what he had in store for his son. Allowing his fellow gladiators to perish was an act Angron would never forgive the Emperor for, leaving a stain on the Primarch's honor that would fester into a deep, lasting wound. The precise details surrounding the Emperor's intervention and Angron's acceptance of his altered fate remained cloaked in murky rumors and speculation. However, it is undeniable that Angron's initial response to his new existence was one of pure fury. For an extended period, any warhound from his legion who dared to approach their Primarch met a gruesome demise. During this tumultuous time, the Legion Master of the Warhounds, Ibram Greer, a revered leader who had commanded the 12th Legion for nearly 30 solar years, vanished from historical records without explanation. The silence surrounding his absence from the Stoic Legion was deafening. Following a spree in which he murdered at least 7 high-ranking officers, including Greer, Captain Khan of the 8th Assault Company took it upon himself to confront Angron in his private quarters. Although nearly beaten to death for his audacity, Khan's refusal to yield, even against a far superior adversary, ultimately convinced Angron of the valor and honor of his legionnaires, leading him to embrace his role as the rightful commander of the 12th Legion. Khan managed to establish a connection with Angron, discussing the rituals of the gladiators and the traditions of the warhounds, revealing the striking similarities between them. With Khan's efforts affirming his belief in the merit of his Astartes as worthy warriors, Angron swiftly took command of the 12th Legion. In a symbolic gesture, he renamed the Warhounds to World Eaters, a title that honored the gladiatorial force he had once led in revolt on his homeworld, known as the Eaters of Cities for their brutal ferocity. The choice of this new name was solidified after an encounter with Dreger, a Terran-born Warhounds legionary and captain of the 9th Company, who promised Angron upon their first meeting that under his leadership the Warhounds would become the Eaters of Worlds. Shortly thereafter, the rebranded World Eaters became deeply influenced by Angron's own insatiable thirst for battle. Throughout the Great Crusade, Angron and the World Eaters achieved numerous victories, though their bloodthirsty tactics drew criticism from some quarters, who questioned the extreme measures employed to ensure the annihilation of their foes. After Angron was teleported away from Nuceria by the Emperor, he underwent examination aboard the flagship of the Warhounds, the Adamant Resolve, in the Apothecarion, where he was assessed by Velkeradar, the venerable Archmagos of the 12th Legion, and a representative of Kelborhal, the Fabricator General of the Mechanicum of Mars. Once the Tech Marines and apothecaries of the 12th Legion had been dismissed, the Primarch was rendered drowsy by the psychic influence of Malkador the Sigillite. For 7 solar hours, Velkeridar scrutinized the Nucerian Archaeotech neural implants that had been forcefully embedded into Angron's skull, all while under the vigilant gaze of the Sigillite. The Archmagos uncovered that the butcher's nails had fundamentally altered Angron's brain structure following their implantation. Upon activation, the nails suppressed the production of serotonin, a neurotransmitter, thus provoking instinctual aggression, while simultaneously dulling emotional responses and reducing electrical activity across all brain regions, except for those responsible for adrenaline regulation. Regrettably, this insidious Archaeotech device had not been engineered to accommodate the intricate biology of a Primarch's brain, leading to deteriorating mental stability and a gradual erosion of the capacity for rational thought. The implants further disrupted higher brain functions by reprogramming emotional responses. To exacerbate the situation, attempts to remove the butcher's nails would inevitably result in Angron's death by destroying his central nervous system. As time progressed, the butcher's nails would inflict rapid cortical degeneration, ultimately leading to the Primarch's demise. This outcome was a certainty, even as Angron's transhuman physiology continuously endeavored to repair the damage inflicted by the nails. Velkeridar could only speculate on how long it would take for the nails to claim the Primarch's life, given the limited data at his disposal, but he provided an informed estimate. The Archmagos relayed his findings to the Emperor and soon received a marked and sealed scroll adorned with the Palatine Aquila, delivered by the Sigillite himself. This message bore the Emperor's own handwriting, instructing the Archmagos to keep his findings confidential and to refrain from discussing what he had uncovered. At this juncture, the 12th Legion was in dire straits, having been one of the last Legiones Astartes to locate their gene-sire. Morale within the Legion was perilously low. They were already burdened with the stigma of being the only Primarch to fail in conquering his homeworld. Should it come to light that he was fated to die before the conclusion of the Great Crusade, it would obliterate what little morale remained among the Space Marine Legions still known as the Warhounds. Subsequently, following Angron's rediscovery, the renowned Mechanicum techno-archaeologist Archon Land was brought to Terra and sequestered within one of the Emperor's clandestine sacred laboratories, located at the heart of an inactive volcano amid a vast expanse of tundra. The Master of Mankind sought Land's expertise to assist in his ongoing examination of Angron's cortical implants, while the Primarch remained in an induced state of unconsciousness. Land had prior experience with this Archaeotech device, known as a cruciamen, during his exploration of the Hexarchian vaults on Mars. The knowledge contained within those vaults posed a significant moral threat to humanity, encompassing insights that could potentially corrupt human cognition. Consequently, the Hexarchian vaults had been sealed by the Emperor's own command, a decision ratified by Fabricator General Kelbahal, resulting in all of Land's discoveries remaining unrecorded. Although Land had encountered references to this ancient device within the heretical texts of the Hexarchian vaults, he had never actually witnessed one in operation or implanted, especially not one of the specific design and intensity that was lodged within the Primarch's brain, whether in stasis or storage. The devices resembling the butcher's nails found in the sealed vault on Mars were far more rudimentary than the Nucerian construct. The alterations inflicted by the Nucerian device on Angron's limbic lobe and insular cortex severely impaired the Primarch's capacity to regulate his emotions. Additionally, the butcher's nails had reconfigured Angron's brain to the extent that he could experience pleasure solely from the sensation of anger. Only neurochemicals and electrical signals associated with rage coursed through Angron's mind, while all other sensations had either faded into numbness or been reprogrammed to provoke an overwhelming sense of agony. The survival of Angron thus far stood as a testament to the resilience instilled in the creations of the Emperor's Primarch project. Due to these neurological alterations, everything inflicted pain upon the Primarch, thinking, feeling, even breathing. The only relief Angron found lay in the neurotransmitters associated with aggression. This profound rewiring of his neurophysiology undoubtedly hindered Angron's higher brain functions, as the device had been intricately crafted despite its crude nature. Land asked the Emperor if it was feasible to remove the device from Angron, to which the Master of Mankind affirmed that it was indeed possible. However, the tendrils of the nails had penetrated deeply, embedding themselves within the substance of the Primarch's brain, weaving through the central nervous system and coiling serpentinely around the spinal column. Compounding the issue, Angron's limbic lobe and insular cortex had not merely been damaged by the implantation of the device, they had been surgically excised even before the technology was inserted. The device that had been hammered into Angron's skull did not merely harm those regions of his brain, it had entirely supplanted them. In truth, the sections of the implant had effectively replaced those vital parts of the Primarch's brain and were now the sole elements sustaining his life. Though the implant had diminished the Primarch's lifespan and tactical sharpness, the Butcher's nails compensated for this by enhancing his combat prowess in other ways. Since Angron was still capable of leading warriors in battle, the Emperor resolved to return him to his legion. Despite the alterations he had undergone, a Primarch remained a Primarch, and the Master of Mankind believed that Angron could still fulfill his role as one of the Emperor's generals. Angron, Primarch of the Legio Astartes World Eaters. Angron rejoined the Great Crusade and assumed command of his legion at the muster grounds on the Warhound's garrison planet of Bot. Following his return from Terra, he swiftly enacted numerous changes within his forces. Remarkably, he was granted considerable autonomy for a newly appointed Primarch, as he was not required to shadow another Primarch brother during his transition to command, nor was he obligated to spend time in the company of his newfound Gene Father. Instead, he was given the freedom to take direct control of his host. With his characteristic fervour for battle, Angron readied the Legion for war. The previous regime of discipline and training that the 12th Legion had adhered to would soon be eclipsed by the intense methods he implemented. Under Angron's leadership, conflict became the sole standard and the ultimate arbiter. Training beyond the most rudimentary elements was rendered as real as any war or battle that the World Eaters Astartes might encounter. Bloodshed, live ammunition, unsheathed blades, fighting pits and gladiatorial contests became the new means of testing the resolve of the Primarch's gene sons, transforming them into more brutal and efficient killers, reflecting the nature of their genetic progenitor. Each warrior bore scars that marked the lessons learned amidst the scorching heat and the unforgiving volcanic sands, with those who faltered, failing to survive long enough to attempt redemption. Recognizing the effectiveness of his own cortical implants in enhancing a warrior's combat capabilities, Angron commanded his apothecarian to implant the Butcher's nails into every Astartes of the World Eaters Legion, augmenting their aggression and pain tolerance beyond even the limits of their gene-engineered forms. However, these implants and the associated surgical procedures left the individuals devoid of any joy or peace, except for that which could be found in the throes of battle, mirroring the experience of their Primarch. In this grim endeavour, Angron tasked the tech marines of the 12th Legion with studying his Butcher's Nails implants, intending for them to serve as a blueprint for creating new versions of the devices. Yet this proved to be a formidable challenge. Angron's implants were relics of a long-lost human technology, poorly understood by their creators, and attempting to remove them from Angron for closer examination would have been fatal. Initial attempts to replicate these implants, conducted by the combined efforts of the Legion's tech marines and apothecaries, met with dismal failure. Under the guidance of Apothecary Galen Serlac, efforts to implant new versions of the Butcher's Nails resulted in a 100% mortality rate among volunteer Astartes. Nonetheless, Angron remained steadfast in his insistence that all his warriors ultimately receive the same crude enhancement. In the initial phase of Angron's command over the 12th Legion, he continued to disregard the majority of his sons, as none possessed the strength to endure the implantation of the Butcher's Nails. At one point, Angron commandeered a frigate and vanished without a trace, abandoning his legion. After 2 Terran years of relentless searching, the missing Primarch was finally located by Centurion Khan, his equerry, on a remote feral world. There, Angron lived in a primal state, desperately seeking an adversary capable of ending his suffering. Upon discovering Angron in this dismal condition, Khan reprimanded him, reminding him of his comrades from Luceria, who would have been appalled to see their Primarch reduced to such a state. This heartfelt appeal persuaded Angron to return to his legion, vowing to lead the World Eaters in a manner that would rid them of their perceived weaknesses. In the years that followed, the Liber Malus recounts how entire star systems capitulated en masse upon detecting the World Eaters' fleet entering their territories, preferring surrender over facing the fury of Angron's space marines. The legends surrounding the Legion's bloody exploits had grown to immense proportions, evoking fear and dread even among seasoned Imperial commanders, and drawing the attention of the Imperial War Council and other Primarchs. Among the most vocal critics of the 12th Legion was Guilliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines. Having fought alongside Angron during the cleansing of Arigata, he witnessed firsthand the carnage left in their wake after the assault on the Basalt Citadel, where the last defenders of this non-compliant human world made their final stand. Guilliman had observed the mounds of World Eater corpses used to breach the formidable fortress, and was appalled by the vengeful devastation the Space Marines unleashed within. As a result of these savage acts, Angron acquired the moniker Red Angel, a title synonymous with the atrocities committed across the galaxy. Of all the titles bestowed upon him, whether in glory or infamy, Angron loathed being called the Red Angel the most. The Imperium already had an angel in Sanguinius, and Angron had no desire to emulate the ethereal mutant who commanded the 9th Legion. Despite his flaws, he took great pride in being his own man above all else. Although Angron despised this particular epithet, it ultimately emerged as one of the most fitting titles for him. By the onset of the 31st millennium, as the brutal ferocity of the World Eaters escalated, several of Angron's brother Primarchs expressed their growing concerns to the Emperor. In response, the Master of Mankind, having withdrawn from the Great Crusade to return to Terra, sought assistance from a most unfortunate source. He dispatched Horus, the Primarch he trusted above all others, to confront Angron and reintegrate him into the Imperial fold. However, unbeknownst to the Emperor, Horus was a master manipulator who had already succumbed to the corrupting influence of the ruinous powers of chaos, following his campaign to reclaim the plague moon of Davin. In Angron, Horus perceived a warrior consumed by resentment and bitterness toward the Emperor, and it was effortless for the War Master to amplify that bitterness while highlighting the Emperor's perceived betrayal of Angron during the events on Luceria. This fed into Angron's belief that the Emperor was a weakling in dire need of a stronger leader, one like Horus. Horus assured Angron he would get what he wanted to hear. When the Horus heresy ignited a galaxy-wide civil war, Angron's World Eaters eagerly marched alongside the War Master into treachery. Thus, the World Eaters became one of Horus's original 4 traitor legions, joining the ranks of the Death Guard, the Word-Bearers, and the Sons of Horus. During the first major engagement of the Horus heresy, the Istvan III atrocity, Horus finally revealed his treacherous intentions, openly defying the Emperor. Angron personally led the World Eaters in a surface assault on Istvan III, tasked with annihilating the remaining loyalist Astartes from the 4 original traitor legions, including his own loyal World Eaters, who had survived the treacherous virus bombardment of the Choral City, the planetary capital. Horus had deceitfully initiated this catastrophic bombardment after the known loyalists from the 4 traitor legions were already engaged in battle against the Slaaneshi rebels occupying the world. The devastating payload, containing a ferocious, flesh-eating virus, resulted in the deaths of billions, whose psychic screams were said to echo louder than the sacred beacon of the Astronomicon. To the traitors' astonishment, nearly 2/3 of the loyalists from the initial wave survived the orbital bombardment, largely due to the timely warning provided by Captain Saul Tarvitz of the Loyalist Emperor's children. Taking matters into his own hands, Angron disregarded Horus's plans and initiated a second wave of drop pods after the initial bombardment failed to eradicate all loyalists. The War Master and his allies could do little but watch in fury as the Red Angel led a full 50 companies of his bloodthirsty Astartes onto the surface, landing in the plaza areas west of the Precentor's palace, driven by the intent to hunt down their own kin with fratricide in their hearts. The World Eaters viciously slaughtered most of their loyalist battle brothers, plunging into the ranks of their former comrades like a white-hot dagger. Enraged by his brother's defiance, Horus felt compelled to support his volatile ally, as the atmospheric aftermath of the global firestorm unleashed by the virus bombs rendered immediate and accurate orbital bombardment impossible. Horus commanded all traitor forces to launch a ground offensive to salvage victory from the chaos. Nearly 2 full solar months elapsed on the dead world of Istvan III as the loyalist survivors persistently stalled the War Master's plans, holding out against the traitor forces. However, their numbers dwindled against the relentless reinforcements and steady supply of munitions flowing to the traitors. Eventually, once the atmosphere had cleared sufficiently for accurate orbital fire, the traitors capitalized on their superiority in arms. Soon, the tide of slaughter swung decisively in the War Master's favor, following another bombardment of the loyalist positions. The gauntlet had been thrown, and the Horus heresy had truly begun. Let history mark my words well, for I care nothing about who sits proud on the throne of terror when the last day dawns. Horus is a fine commander, but that's the limit of my admiration for that arrogant, preening bastard. I joined his rebellion because I can tolerate him easier than I can endure the abomination that names himself master of mankind. You want the truth of my life and death? I am Angron, the Eater of Worlds, and I am already dead. I died over 100 years ago in the mountains north of the city that enslaved me. I died after Deshelika, Primarch Angron talking to his brother Lorgar. Angron and his World Eaters unleashed a gruesome rampage across the galaxy, dismissing War Master Horus's summons to assemble at Ullanor in preparation for the final assault on the throne world. In response, Perturabo, the Lord of Iron and the Primarch of the Iron Warriors Legion, received orders from Horus to capture Angron by any means necessary. The Iron Warriors tracked the World Eaters to the planet Deluge, where they encountered a horrific scene. The entire population had been slaughtered and piled into massive mounds of corpses. Almost immediately, they were attacked by frenzied World Eaters and Cornate demons. After withstanding this initial assault, the skies darkened, heralding the entrance of the demon Primarch Angron into the chaos. A fierce confrontation erupted between Perturabo and Angron, with the demon Primarch displaying both superior strength and speed. Despite sustaining multiple injuries, the Lord of Iron persisted and taunted Angron, proclaiming that he had been born a slave and would remain one, eternally bound to darkness. Leveraging his exceptional tactical skills, along with the support of the Iron Warriors and his Iron Circle of robotic honor guards, Perturabo managed to outmaneuver and bombard the World Eaters, forcing them into submission and overcoming Angron in the process. However, just then, an ultramarine fleet emerged in orbit above the planet. Angron laughed mockingly, announcing that they were all doomed. Perturabo countered by reminding Angron of the time he had witnessed his own warriors slaughtered by the slave masters on Nuteria, without lifting a finger to intervene. This remark spurred the demon Primarch into action. Summoning a warp storm, both the Iron Warriors and World Eaters' fleets managed to evade the Ultramarines and set course for Ullanor. Angron would later make his appearance during the climactic events of the Solar War, as a massive warp rift opened above Luna, enabling the primary traitor strike force to assault the throne world directly. The demon Primarch was seen positioned on the battlements of his flagship, Conqueror, throughout the battle over Luna. By the onset of the Siege of Terror, Angron had completely succumbed to the influence of the blood god Khorne and his insatiable thirst for carnage. He insisted that Horus permit him to directly assault the Imperial Palace, disregarding the formidable psychic barrier that surrounded the throne world, which would likely obliterate the demon prince until a means to weaken it could be discovered. When Angron learned that the Death Guard would lead the traitor assault on Terra, he erupted into a furious anger, slaughtering anyone unfortunate enough to be within the confines of the Conqueror when the demon Primarch passed by. Lotara Sarin, the mortal captain of the Conqueror, was concerned that Angron's unchecked fury would lead him to inadvertently kill the tech priests responsible for maintaining the vessel's plasma reactor, potentially triggering a catastrophic explosion. To avert this disaster, Sarin plotted with Captain Gendor Skravok of the Night Lords, known as the Painted Count, and Khan to teleport Angron into the Night Lord's flagship, Nightfall. This vessel housed a twisted labyrinth that Conrad Kurz had long utilized for the torture and execution of captives. Pressuring Khan into action, the eighth captain confronted the enraged demon Primarch directly. Angron revealed to his equerry that the dark gods had foretold Khan's ultimate fate as the Chosen of Khorne. Seeking to usurp Khan's position as the blood gods favored, the two engaged in combat. However, Khan struggled to contend with his genesire's formidable might. Just as Angron was about to deliver a fatal blow, Khan managed to place a teleport Homer on the demon Primarch, successfully transporting him off the Conqueror and into the depths of the Nightfall. Once aboard the Night Lord's flagship, Angron found himself ensnared in a labyrinthine prison of singular intent. At the behest of the Night Haunter, the Iron Warrior's Primarch Perturabo had crafted a unique confinement for his grim brother, reminiscent of Perturabo's own private sanctum, known as the Cavea Ferrum. This elaborate prison was a twisting maze, its uniform walls and peculiar geometric layout rendering it nearly impossible to chart, thus preventing escape. Any attempt to mentally navigate the labyrinth would ensnare an individual in a series of turns that seemed physically implausible. Despite numerous attempts to map the structure, one could only manage to traverse a few of its convoluted corridors before becoming utterly disoriented. Following the Dropsite massacre on Istvan V, the Night Haunter had captured Vulcan, the Primarch of the Salamanders, using this very labyrinth to torment and psychologically dismantle him over several solar months. Meanwhile, the traitors on the surface of Terra conducted a series of dark rituals that ultimately weakened the Emperor's psychic barrier surrounding the throne world, enabling them to deploy their demonic allies. The demon Primarch was launched from the hold of the Nightfall, hurtling through the void towards the surface of Terra. As Angron descended through the atmosphere, he appeared as a colossal blazing meteor. Upon his impact with the ground, the shockwave unleashed by the demon Primarch's arrival obliterated everything in its vicinity, friend and foe alike. Brandishing the black blade, Angron unleashed his fury upon the Loyalist forces, carving a path towards the very walls of the Imperial Palace. It was here that he encountered his brother Sanguinius, the angelic Primarch of the Blood Angels, and issued a challenge. Sanguinius, however, simply saluted Angron and declined the fight, stating that their time to battle would come. But it was not that day. He then retreated into the sanctuary of the Imperial Palace. Angron's frustration boiled over. He was unable to breach the lingering effects of the Emperor's psychic barrier to pursue his brother, whom he deemed cowardly. As the siege of Terra intensified, Angron wreaked havoc at the Lion's Gate spaceport, where he destroyed both a Capital Imperialis super-heavy tank and a Leviathan transport, yet he still found himself unable to penetrate the walls of the Imperial Palace. Eventually, the traitors managed to capture the Lion's Gate spaceport through a concerted assault. As the Emperor's psychic barrier contracted to protect the Sanctum Imperialis, Angron led a frenzied horde of blood-maddened World-Eaters onto the Eternity Wall, commencing the slaughter of the Loyalist defenders. Endowed with demonic gifts, Angron and his World-Eaters overwhelmed the Loyalist forces stationed at the Eternity Wall. Subsequently, the World-Eaters were tasked with leading the frontal assault on the Imperial Palace itself. Surviving video logs from the siege depict the World-Eaters breaching the palace walls, with Angron, a twisted red figure wielding his glowing rune sword, at the forefront. Among the first to breach the gate was Khan. Despite conflicting accounts from the Sons of Horus, records from the World-Eaters indicate that it was Angron's demonic black blade that brought down the grand entrance of the Imperial Palace. The World-Eaters revelled in a true harvest of blood upon Terra, yet they were denied ultimate victory. With the Dark Angels and Space Wolves legions en route to reinforce the Loyalist defenders, Horus made a desperate gamble to secure the siege. He lowered the void shields on his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, challenging the Emperor to confront him directly. The Master of Mankind accepted this challenge and faced his betrayer in a clash that would determine the galaxy's fate. The two engaged in a titanic struggle, one that was both physical and psychic. Ultimately, the Emperor triumphed, slaying Horus and erasing even his soul from existence, but at a grave cost, his own humanity and eternal confinement within the Golden Throne. With the demise of their greatest champion, the Chaos Army disintegrated and fled from Terra. Angron was the last to depart, casting a longing glance back at the Imperial Palace, which had withstood even his wrath. Leading the surviving World Eaters into the depths of the Eye of Terror, the massive warp rift located in the galaxy's northwestern reaches, Angron and his heretic Astartes now had eternity to seek vengeance as part of the long war against the forces of the Corpse Emperor. With the Horus heresy concluded, the World Eaters retreated into the Eye of Terror, to a demon world meticulously prepared for Angron by Khorne. However, the Legion rapidly devolved into roving warbands of Chaos Space Marines, driven inward by the relentless and bloodthirsty demands of Khorne. As a result, even to this day they lack a designated home base, with each warband typically operating from whatever starship they can seize, stained with the blood of their foes. Khan, who served as the captain of the 8th Assault Company of the Warhounds, was profoundly affected upon first beholding his Primarch's countenance, a description that has echoed through the ages. Wiry, copper-red hair curled away from a prominent brow, while pale eyes sat deeply entrenched behind cheekbones that sloped down like axe blades towards an aquiline nose and a wide, thin-lipped mouth. It was the visage of a general destined to lead others to their end, a mentor at whose feet the wise would eagerly seek to learn, a king fashioned for the reverence of worlds, the face of a Primarch. Yet rage transformed it into that of a beast. The fury surged and twisted his features, as though a tumor had erupted from the skull beneath. His eyes became hollow, yellow pits, the proud contours of his brow and jaw were contorted, and his lips were drawn back, exposing his teeth. In accordance with the traditions of the Nucerian gladiators among whom he was raised, Angron carved scars into his torso after each battle, creating a continuous length known as the Triumph Rope. With every victory, the scar was allowed to heal naturally, while for each defeat, Angron would deliberately introduce dirt into the wound, causing the scar to darken to a black hue. Remarkably, he was the only gladiator in the annals of Nucerian history to bear no black scars. Corvus Corax held the belief that no other Primarch could match Angron in single combat, save for Horus and possibly Sanguinius. Leman Russ was often regarded as Angron's equal in physical confrontation. However, Rogal Dorn contended that he could easily outmaneuver Angron through strategy and cunning, viewing him as significantly less of a threat than Horus, whose strategic genius he greatly respected. Before receiving the Butcher's Nails implants, Angron exhibited an innate psychic ability that enabled him not only to sense but also to absorb the pain and negative emotions of others. He utilized this empathic power to soothe the other child slaves within the caves of Nuceria before being taken to the city of Deshea.